had chocolate tips. I don't know where he lost his velvet or whatever. But almost all the tips of his antlers were like brown, and they nicknamed him Fondue because of that. I'm watching this whole thing go down, and I'm bow ready and I'm ready to go, and all of a sudden they break off and they get done fighting, and the one of the deer comes, the one with the chocolate tips comes to the clump of dirt. I'm like 25 yards, got him. I sit back and I take my time and I draw and I anchor and I let the arrow go, and it goes right underneath him. I can see a poof of white hair, gives him a haircut on his belly, and it hits the dirt, and he goes running away. And I'm devastated. Like, I don't know if I just didn't, if I pulled it or what was going on, but I was like, everything felt right, and it doesn't make any sense,
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, episode number 217. Nick Hoffman, the farm, the fiddle, deer hunting, and a wild ride. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, the Horny Buck Seed Company, Covert Scouting Cameras, the ScentLock Enforcer. Take control of your odor footprint with the ScentLock Enforcer, your personal ozone generator, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, this is Ben Rising with Whitetail Edge. Sit tight because you're about to listen to the best podcast that you possibly can listen to, the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is Bill Vale from PressureDeerPro.com, and you're listening to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
This is John Eberhart. I've been hunting out of the saddle since 1981. I'm about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. My name is Jay, and for Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller, I'd like to welcome you to the show. I suspect that you are somewhere in a tree stand right now. A couple of things I would like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please, go check us out on iTunes. Subscribe, leave us a review. We want to try and push this podcast up the charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to go and leave a review on iTunes and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access to this show each and every week with a notification on your iPhone. If you're not on an iPhone, don't worry about it. But you can access this show on YouTube in its entirety, on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. It's all right there for you to grab and listen as you please. Tom, tell me about hashtag Deer Week. What's that all about?
Deer Week is going to be a celebration of the great sport of deer hunting that we all know and love. It's going to be on both the Sportsman's Channel. I'm going to be hosting it on the Sportsman's Channel. A friend of mine, Michael Waddell, you may have heard of him. He's going to be the host. Yeah, he's going to be the host on Outdoor Channel. And there's even going to be some kind of going back and forth, some riffing between Michael and I with some split screen stuff. And hashtag Deer Week is how the viewers, the listeners out there can share their deer hunting stories. They can ask questions. They can be involved. And it's just, it's something that the Outdoor Sportsman's Group celebrate. This is basically the society that we all are of deer hunters. Every evening, starting October 15th through the 21st, from 7 to 11 Eastern time on both networks simultaneously, it's going to be nothing but deer hunting techniques that a lot of us use, answering questions from viewers and listeners, tactics that we how different ways we hunt, our favorite deer hunting stories, our favorite deer and venison recipes, you name it. This is about everything that can go into an individual's hunt or a hunting season, or it's like you say, a certain way that you would hunt. So this is all about deer hunting, everything you ever want to know. So it's right around the corner. And the idea is that all of the shows that, would normally run from 7 Eastern to 11 Eastern each evening in their designated time slots, every episode is going to be what they either consider to be one of the most informative deer episodes that they've ever got, or their favorite deer hunt, or maybe even a collaboration of all the above. Starting October 15th on each network, Sportsman's Channel and Outdoor Channel, 7 Eastern, everybody needs to be tuning in for Deer Week.
We'll turn to our interview with Nick Hoffman in just a moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. Our first story this week: what happened to the tiny key deer during Hurricane Irma? This story was originally featured on the Miami Herald website and was reported by David Goodhue. The federally protected key deer were exposed to Hurricane Irma, and authorities will assess their situation when it's safe to return to the Keys. Dan Clark, superintendent of the National Key Deer Refuge, said his first priority as the massive storm approached was to evacuate National Wildlife Refuge personnel assigned to the area. After we receive information from Monroe County that it is safe to return and we can inhabit the Lower Keys, a post-storm assessment of our facilities and residences will be conducted to determine if we can operate, Clark said. The small deer, whose estimated numbers range from 800 to 1,000, live mostly on the Lower Keys. Try that over again, Jay. The small deer, whose estimated numbers range from 800 to 1,000, live mostly on the lower key islands of Big Pine Key and Little Torch Key. What's become of the deer is not known, but Clark said not much could have been done to protect the animals from Mother Nature. Since the federal trust resources on the Keys Refuge are wild, we do not have sufficient plans to collect any deer, Clark said. We do not have the capacity to do so, and husbandry following the hurricane would be extremely difficult. Like all other agencies planning to come back down to the Keys post-Irma, Clark said he and his staff have no idea what types of conditions to which they are returning, so they can't adequately plan their response when it comes to the deer. We will assess the status of all refuge resources when it's safe to do so, and when we have the ability to do so, Clark said. New urgency for hunters to test deer for CWD. This story was originally featured on the Wisconsin State Journal website and was reported by Stephen Verberg. The University of Wisconsin-Madison lab that checks deer carcasses for deadly brain disease said Monday there may be increased urgency for hunters to test for chronic wasting disease this year based on new scientific research. Preliminary results of studies released earlier this year in Canada found for the first time CWD could be transmitted to primates. There still have been no known instances of humans contracting CWD, but hunters should know the new study demonstrates the risk isn't non-existent, said Keith Paulson, Diagnostic Case and Outreach Coordinator at the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory. We're sure the risk is pretty low, but it's not zero, Paulson said. It would be a mistake to ignore it. Scientists and some leaders of hunting groups have expressed growing concern about the rapid spread of CWD through Wisconsin's deer herd, but most hunters don't take advantage of the free state testing of the deer they kill. CWD is related to incurable illnesses that can cause dementia and death in humans. All of the diseases are caused by proteins called prions that can change their characteristics over time, Paulson said. CWD's tendency to change and its ability to incubate in some animals for years before symptoms appear are among factors that make eating CWD-tainted meat risky, Paulson said. Health officials recommend that hunters strongly consider testing and that they not eat infected venison. The State Department of Health Services tracks cases of human prion diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob and compares them to registries of people who eat venison, but the agency has said it hasn't found significant correlations. California's general deer season opens September 16 across much of the state. Hunters advised to check out area closures before heading out. This story was originally featured on the DeerFriendly.com website. Deer season is already underway in 2 of California's deer hunting zones along the coast, but 11 zones opened Saturday, September 16th. 6 other deer hunting zones opened the following week on Saturday, September 23rd. Severe winter weather conditions took a toll on some migratory deer populations, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the CDFW, reduced the number of tags for a few popular areas in order to sustain herds over the long term. Not all populations suffered heavy winter losses, however, and CDFW's trail cameras and fecal DNA studies revealed bucks out there for the taking. Detailed information on California's various deer zones, including season dates, descriptions, and maps, is available on CDFW's deer hunting webpage, www.wildlife.ca.gov/hunting. Hunters are strongly advised to check area closures and local restrictions before heading out. Fire season is here and several large wildfires are burning currently, which may close some areas to hunting. Additionally, the severe winter damaged roads in some areas, which may account for other closures or restricted access. For the 2016 season, a record 84% of deer tag holders complied with California's new mandatory deer tag reporting requirement. CDFW thanks all those who reported and hopes for increased participation following the 2017 season. California is phasing in the use of non-lead ammunition for hunting. Lead ammunition is permitted for hunting deer in California in 2017 outside of the California Condor Range, state wildlife areas, or ecological reserves where non-lead ammunition is required. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller with the Deer News. Next up is our interview with Nick Hoffman. When you get your own Wikipedia page, you know you've done something notable. Turns out Nick Hoffman has a page on the interweb-based encyclopedia, and he should. Nick made a career out of playing fiddle next to the likes of Kenny Chesney, Keith Urban, Trace Adkins, Sara Evans, and Brooks and Dunn. But the fun doesn't stop there. Nick has a show on the Outdoor Channel called Nick's Wild Ride, where he hunts different parts of the world, but explores and documents unique aspects of the local culture while on location. We suspect that Nick learned a thing or two while hunting different species, so we asked him. He said the big thing is to play the wind, sit down, and shut up, which happens to be an old Fred Bear saying. So without further ado, here is Nick Hoffman. Nick Hoffman, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, man. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. It smells like deer season out there, and it's got that cool, crisp feel in the evenings. Feels like early bow season.
Man, it sure does. I'm in right now in Nashville, just north of Nashville, Tennessee, at my house, and my home farm is about an hour north of here in north of Bowling Green, Kentucky. So, the weather here is a little different than where you're at.
Right.
But right now, the mornings are like 50 degrees, 60 degrees. It's getting cool. It's kind of dank and cool in the mornings, and all of a sudden, boom, it just feels like that. So our early season here is hot still. Early season in the South is completely different than early season in Minnesota, where I grew up. Let me just say that.
I can appreciate the Minnesota weather and atmosphere there because I'm in the northern climate too, so I understand.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what's funny to me is that the most attractive thing about deer hunting to me is that deer are the same everywhere you go for the most part. You know what I mean? And they might look a little different, or their bodies are a little bigger or smaller, but that early season deer thing is addictive to me because they are patterned, and they're in a routine that is predictable, especially here in the South. I mean, I've got a legitimate chance of shooting a big deer in velvet this weekend, and that's really fun because every single day on camera, these deer are coming in within 10 minutes, like they're on a dinner bell. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Boom, 10 minute. Here's 7:25. Here comes the big 8. You know what I mean? Boom, and I think that's really fun. It's a different kind of. It's a completely different deal than November. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's totally different. Yeah, I've hunted some of the South Virginia and some of the southern states, and they seem to be on a pattern. It was October still, but still on a bit of a pattern before they really get off their pattern.
Yeah, and you can't necessarily get that everywhere else, because your season starts a little later, and so. But here in the South, that's one of the fun things about hunting deer in the South is that you get those couple of weeks of velvet pattern before they drop velvet and start getting all right. In love. Yeah, so and it's fun.
Went to visit a buddy Brian down there in Virginia, and he dropped me off at one of his tree stands, and he said at 6:00 thereabouts there'll be 2 doe that come down the trail, and sure enough, here they come. It's uncanny.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. Yeah. Sorry, I got off on a diatribe there.
That's all right. I love tangents, man. Tangents are cool. That's what the long form podcast is all about: tangents and diatribes. So you're from Minnesota. You're in Nashville now, but you're from Minnesota.
That's right.
Whereabouts in Minnesota, and what was your childhood like growing up in Minnesota?
I grew up about an hour north of the Twin Cities, north of a town called Anoka. Anoka is famous in the hunting world for being the home of Fiddle premium, Ammunition.
Sure,
and,
big company.
And of course, my family is very, very, the history of Federal is very much entwined with the history of my family. I grew up on a little farm just north of there, about 15, 20 minutes north of Anoka. And the connection that I have to Federal is really interesting because my grandfather is he's an inventor and an electrical engineer, and he invented a lot of really interesting stuff, including the electric photocell eye that is used in like modern day depth finders and stuff like that. And so,
cool.
And back then he was in the service, and he had developed this eye that would help break an electrical connection, basically, if your hand crossed it. It was basically a photocell beam that went across. And the reason he came up with that idea is that there were young ladies in the federal ammunition plant that were losing their fingers in these presses, because if they got their fingers in just the wrong spot, could smash their fingers off, right? He had this idea to create basically a light barrier where if their fingers got in the wrong spot, it would shut the machine off. And so he because of that, Federal hired him to implement that technology in all of their machines. And the president of Federal at the time was so impressed with his kind of engineering acumen that he funded an engineering company called Hoffman Engineering, and which is still to this day. Hoffman Engineering is still there, and it's connected. The Federal Ammunition Building and the Hoffman Engineering Building are connected, and they share a cafeteria to this day. So if it weren't for Charles Horn and Federal Ammunition, my family wouldn't, probably still be in Anoka, and wouldn't just have the kind of life we've had. So it's by no means, we didn't grow up super rich or anything like that, but my grandfather made a living as an engineer and developed a company that ended up, his name is on the side of the building this day. So it's kind of pretty neat story.
I'd say
there's another tangent for you. I have a feeling this is going to be a conversation of tangents.
Perfect. You're well suited for a podcast, Nick.
But you asked about how I grew up. I had the coolest area to grow up in when it came to the lifestyle and the kind of kid I was. I started playing fiddle when I was 4 or 5 years old. My grandfather was a fiddle player. My grandmother is a piano player. We had jam sessions at the Hoffman house every Saturday night for the most part.
That's
People
awesome.
People just started showing up around 6 o'clock and didn't really need an invitation, and we played music every weekend. And so I was really lucky to have grown up in that, and I was close enough to Minneapolis, an hour away, that you could go into town and hear concerts and do really cool stuff that was inspiring to me as a musician. But I also grew up in the middle of an intersection of a farm town called Now Then, Minnesota, which is at the time was famous. They had T-shirts that said Now Then population 47, and it was an intersection. And on the intersection there was a gas station and meat market that processed deer. On the other corner was a Case IH dealership, and then there was a church, and then a house, and the guy that lived in the house owned all of that stuff. And so he was the guy that was a big inspiration for me in my life. I worked at that Case IH dealership. I worked at that meat market. I did a bunch of stuff when I was younger. So I grew up in like this cool central spot where I had all the music I wanted, but I also was in the middle of I was half hour from pheasant and grouse country, like major pheasant and grouse country. I had pheasants outside my door.
Sure.
I had deer walking through my backyard every day, and I lived the 40 acres in between us was bordered up to a little tiny lake called Pickerel Lake, and it was full of ducks. And so I was in just this wildlife hotbed. The only caveat was that I didn't have anybody in my family that hunted. I didn't grow up in an outdoor family at all. That being said, we loved being outside and doing hiking and doing stuff like that, but nobody in my family hunted.
Wow.
And so I was one of those kids that just for whatever reason was called to it. I wanted to hunt from the time I was just a kid. I'm baby. I've just always wanted to hunt. I was never a shoot 'em up army kid, that ran around the yard with guns, bang, 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 bang. I never played cowboys and Indians. I wasn't like that at all, but I always wanted to hunt. And from that time, I don't know, 10 years old, maybe, when I was able to have a little money, I spent my money on Field and Stream magazines.
Sure.
I read about and daydreamed about going to New Zealand or hunting in Iowa or, mule deer hunting out west, like those things, those stories, and even going to Africa and things like that. Those stories in those magazines it absolutely captured me. Mm-hmm. But I read that stuff and dreamed about hunting long before I ever got a chance to hunt. And my introduction to actually going out and hunting was my neighbor. I went over there to help him mow the lawn one day, and I saw his mounts in his house, and he had a bunch of mule deer mounts and a bunch of whitetail mounts, and I asked him about him, and he said, I'll take you hunting if you want. And of course, I jumped at that, and so he took me muzzleloader hunting for the first muzzleloader season in Minnesota when I was 12 years old. And we took a Kentucky long rifle, patch and ball,
wow,
and loose powder, which was, I didn't know at the time, but he was a traditional hunter and he's a really neat guy. Yeah. I didn't put all that together at the time. No labels for me then. And he took me out and my life has changed. I mean, literally, I would consider my life pre that hunt and post that hunt. And then after that same winter, a good friend of mine took me on my first duck hunt. And so that year was that winter, that season, when I was 12 years old, just changed everything for me. And so all of a sudden now I had two parallel paths, my music path and my hunting path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. I mean, talk about a great impression that a Kentucky long rifle and a ball and patch hunt would leave on a kid.
And I think now that I look back at it, I didn't realize how cool that was at the time, right? Like, right. Even just the marksmanship side of it. We practiced. I would go across the way, across the field, and go over to his house, every other day, and we'd sit there and shoot that thing and practice. And he would teach me. The trigger was literally you could take a hair and pull a hair back on that trigger, and it would go off. And he taught me the basics of marksmanship and the basics of trigger control and all these things that I didn't realize he was teaching me at the time that laid a great foundation for me. And it was all because of that gun. The trigger would go off and there was a split second before it would go boom. And you had to control your body to make sure that you let everything surprise you, and all these things that you now use that I use in bow hunting. Right. When you're shooting a bow, all these technique things all started with that big long Kentucky long rifle.
Right.
So pretty cool.
That is
cool stuff.
So Minneapolis, it was where you kind of formed your music career, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, and growing up in Minnesota, period, there's just a huge music scene in Minnesota, on rock, pop, country, and bluegrass. And so I was a fiddle player and a singer, and I wanted to play old country music and bluegrass. That's all I cared about. And believe it or not, Minnesota is a hotbed for fiddle players. Here in Nashville, there are probably 10 fiddle players from Minnesota, which probably make up about half of the fiddle player population here.
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Yeah, it is. And the reason for that is that there's big German and Scandinavian immigrants population in Minnesota, and the same thing with all the hillbillies in the South. A lot of those are German, Scandinavian, Irish immigrants, and all those cultures have big fiddle contingents. All their music is very violin fiddle based, and so all the traditional Scandinavian songs are played on the fiddle. And a lot of people wouldn't think about it like that because you think about it being a southern country instrument, but it's really a traditional instrument from the old country. And so there's a lot of fiddle players that come out of Minnesota. There's fiddle contests every weekend and stuff. So I grew up in this kind of fiddle hotbed in a way, and that shaped who I was and what I did all through growing up. When everybody else was out playing football, I was practicing my fiddle.
Right. That's fascinating. I spent 4 or 5 days in Minneapolis in the middle of the winter one year. I don't know why I was there in the winter, but it was about as brutally cold as I can remember any place I've ever been.
Mm-hmm. It's a miserably cold place in the winter. There's no doubt.
Right. And I think it was there in mid-January. And as I recall, there were underground tunnels that you could travel through to avoid the cold.
Yeah, we call them the hamster tubes.
The hamster tubes, exactly. Uh-huh. And I didn't know that until we were on our way out. And so we just, had our cold gear as we were walking. It was a business trip, so we were in suits and we were walking down the Minneapolis streets in the cold, but there was nobody in there. So we were stopping in a bar as long as we could take the next phase of the walk where we were going to. But I do remember that the culture and it seemed like everybody was blonde hair and blue eyed. Everywhere I looked, so the Scandinavian ethnicity was there for sure.
Oh, it's very much so, especially in that part of the state. The central and northern parts of the state are just loaded with Scandinavian immigrants. And a lot of that's because Minnesota is very similar geography and or at least topography and landscape and even soil wise, it's very, very similar to Scandinavia.
Fascinating. All right, so land of the Vikings, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Okay. Pretty interesting.
That is very interesting. So that more or less was the foundation of some of the future of your life as a musician and as a hunter. And do you remember the first gun you ever shot?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. So we didn't hunt, but there was always guns around. My grandfather on my mom's side, we would go up to their house in northern Minnesota, and there was a little gun range not too far from there, and my grandpa and my dad and I would go there and shoot his .22. So I would say from 5-6 years old, shooting a little .22 long rifle was my first gun, as it should be. That's what everybody's first gun should be, right? So
it seems like that is everybody's first gun.
Yeah, and we would go there, and I just have the most wonderfully fond memories of going to the range with my dad and my grandfather, and there's actually a pretty funny story that the first swear word that my parents ever heard me utter was at the range with my grandpa, because I would shoot and couldn't hit anything, and then my grandpa would come up there and shoot right away, and he would hit the bullseye every time, and I turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, Papa's a and he goes, "Excuse me, young man?" First of all, where'd you hear that? And second of all, where'd you learn that? And second of all, he is kind of, yeah, you're right. You kind of got that. So no, and they still laugh about that to this day. I don't know whether or not you can say that on your podcast or not, but that's a funny story.
We'll probably bleep it out. In a way, we have this. We have a sound effect that's an arrow hitting a target, and we'll just
put
that in there. That's funny. So your music career seemed to have taken off. I mean, you've played with some pretty big stars, and you have to be pretty good to make a living at it. You want to talk a little bit about how you transitioned out of Minnesota, which is the land of fiddle players, and got into a major scene? Yeah,
the way it all went down for me is I always knew that I was going to move to Nashville. I always dreamed about being on the Grand Ole Opry. That was going to be the path of my life from the time I was probably 15 on. I knew what I was going to do. And so, without getting into some of the more boring details of it, in a long story short, is that I ran away from home when I was just not quite 17. Okay. And one night I hopped a Greyhound bus with about $60 in cash and a guitar and a fiddle and a sack full of clothes, and I went to Branson, Missouri, and that's where I thought I was going to make it big, And I had been down there on vacation with my grandparents about 6 months before that, and I was really taken with the idea that, man, what am I doing here in Minnesota, spinning my wheels when I could be down in Branson making it big?
Right.
And so I did. I hopped a Greyhound and went down there and played for tips and made some money and got a hotel room for a week, and that hotel room for a week led to getting an apartment for a month, and I ended up getting a job at a show called the Dixie Stampede down there, and I played fiddle in their pre-show, and I rode horses and sang in their main show, and I just, it literally was where I kind of cut my teeth a little bit. Wow. And so I was able to kind of pull myself up by the bootstraps there, and that trip to Branson led me to meet a guy who subsequently moved to Nashville, and he ended up playing for this guy Kenny Chesney, who was just getting started at the time. So fast forward a couple of years, I'm ready to move to Nashville, and so I moved there in January of 2000. U-Haul pulling my pickup behind, and I come into town and I don't know anyone, and so the only guy that I know in Nashville is this guy Wyatt that I knew in Branson a little bit. Okay. And so a friend, fiddle playing friend of mine, connected me with Wyatt again, and Wyatt said, hey, it's crazy that we've gotten in touch because we've recently fired our fiddle player. I'm still playing with this guy Kenny Chesney. Would you be interested in playing with us? And I said, well, of course, absolutely. Let's do it. So I hopped a bus and went on a 2-week run with him, and 13, 12 years later, I was still there. And at that time, that first gig was in a club in Atlanta for, 1,000 or less people, like 500 people. And within 2 years, it was stadiums full of people. And it was literally every musician's dream come true. It was Leno and Letterman and award shows and all the stuff that I dreamed about as a kid.
Wow.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of luck there. There's a lot of things that had to align. The stars had to align to make that happen. And I think my time in playing in bands in Minnesota and my time in Branson, had me prepared for it. But the truth is I wasn't prepared for it. When I look back at it, I was green as the grass. You know what I mean? I thought I knew what I was doing, and I thought I was good at what I was doing. But when I look back at it now, I was 19 years old, and all those old veterans in that band looked at me like I was Lead looked at me like I was 19. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
So young and dumb is what I was. But I managed to somehow, through their patience and guidance, I got my stripes. So
that's really interesting. That sounds like the quintessential rock star story, right? Like, run away from home and head to the place where the music is.
Right, and it literally was. It seems when I look back at it like something from a movie, and then it gets better. Through that, I meet all these people that I've looked up to my whole life, and these stories of inspiration could go on and on about, the time that I had a quick conversation with Bruce Springsteen backstage, and he told me about, how hard it is to keep a band together, and, these kinds of things, and like just neat stories that I could go on and on about. And the one thing though through all that was missing was the thing that I really did move to town for, to get my own record deal and to be my own artist and to write my own songs. I'm on the radio. And so, through the years, I kept working on that, and I ended up forming a group called The Farm, and we got signed to Warner Brothers in 2010 and had 2 top 40 songs on the radio. And that was the culmination of it all for me, getting to write a song, have it be on the radio. Our first single, Hope Sweet Home, was a top 20 song, and it was the culmination for it all for me, getting nominated. We got nominated for a bunch of big awards, and we played on all the TV shows and stuff. And that's, so I've gotten to see it from all sides and literally live every musician's dream. Get to play next to one of your heroes and one of the biggest artists in the world, and then on top of that, get to have your own record deal on a major label and do your own songs, and that's not done yet either. I got a brand new solo record coming out in the spring, so it's just a constant evolving thing, this music,
right? Do you think that life should be more like that, where you take a chance and go to the place where your dreams are, and instead of kind of getting caught up in the day-to-day 9-to-5 office type jobs?
Yeah, of course the answer for me would say, oh yeah, of course that's what everybody should do.
Right.
But to me it seems condescending to say, you just need to shove it all aside and go after your dreams. The truth is that yes, we are all so concerned with the 9-to-5 and the grind and the keeping up with the Joneses, that everybody seems to set their dreams aside. When you're young and you're in your 20s, you have all these ideas of what you need, what you want to do with your life, and then jobs and bills and keeping up with friends and wives and husbands and kids, they come into the picture, and that's a real thing, right. But early on, I was really lucky. There was a couple of things that helped me. One of them was my dad. My dad is the hardest working guy I know.
Okay.
He's a self-employed heating and air conditioning guy, and he's been very successful at it, but it's just him. He goes around in a van, and he is that local guy that you call when your furnace or air conditioner breaks. He works really long hours. Mm-hmm. He works his absolute butt off. And one day we were driving down the road in his van, and I asked him about whether or not he likes his job. And he said, what I like about my job is the freedom I have, that I don't work for anybody. I'm my own boss. He said, but if I had it all to do over again, and this is probably when I'm like 12 or 13, 14 years old, he says, I always really wanted to be a pilot. And I never went and learned to do that. Yeah. And I would have liked to have maybe gone and been a pilot. And it just knocked me down in the dirt, because here my identity with my dad was this. He's a furnace guy. That's what he does. And I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. And here I found out that the coolest guy in the world would rather be doing something else. You know what I mean? And,
right.
And so he said to me in that same sentence, he said, you have the ability right now to do anything you want. And if you work hard enough at what you're doing right now, if you work hard enough at playing fiddle, it'll take you wherever you want to go. Right. And that's not as cliche as it sounds. Those are the words he said to me. And it changed everything for me, because I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to get there. I'm going to do it. And I used to stand in front of the fiddle and in front of the mirror at night, spinning my fiddle bow and pretending to be Roy Acuff on the Grand Ole Opry, and I knew that's what I wanted. Right. And I think that's the best gift anybody can give you, is to get you to chase your dreams. And so there's a great quote from Lee Iacocca, who's the guy that brought GM back from the brink back in the day.
That's right.
And he, one of the first sentences in his autobiography is, and I'm paraphrasing here, this isn't exactly how he says it, but he basically says, you look at a successful person, and you'll look at somebody who is jumped off of cliffs and taken leaps more times than they can count. And you can't just jump off a cliff blindly, but if you know there's water underneath there, then there's nothing wrong with jumping. You're going to be okay.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? And it's like, so you don't make stupid decisions, but you have to be willing to take leaps.
Right.
And every leap I've ever taken in my life, the Nick's Wild Ride TV show included, I stressed about it and worried about it. And then 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks, even a week later, I'm like, man, why did I worry so much? Right. This isn't that bad, right. And the same thing goes for running away from home. You just got to believe in yourself and go for it, and that sounds so cliche. And I'm so careful to say stuff like that, because saying follow your dreams sounds so cheesy, but I'm living proof that it works,
it is a bit cliche. I give you that, but it seems like there should be more of that in the world these days, more than ever. The country isn't built on brick and mortar anymore. It's built on Amazon and digital more than in a lot of ways, more than it ever has.
Absolutely. I think the one thing that if I'm going to wax poetic about that at all, I would say this: I get that question quite a bit, right? And the one thing that I notice about, I'm nearly 40 now, so I can start to look at people and call them kids a little bit. You know what I mean?
Sure,
and the one thing I can say about kids nowadays is that it's such an instant gratification society that everybody wants something, but they don't want to work for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be a rock star. I want to be a famous actor. The one I hear all the time now is, hey, I want to have a hunting TV show. How do I do that? Well, man, first of all, it's all those things. You don't just flip a switch or flick your, snap your fingers, and it doesn't just happen like that. It happens literally at the expense of something else. Everything, you don't get anything without giving something, and it's also time on the water, time you put in, and the amount of resourcefulness and hard work you put in. It's an equation, and I think that people aren't willing to put the work in for their dreams half the time, and then they get bitter that they didn't get them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But the 90% of the people I know that have had big success, they just literally devoted everything, and they risked everything for it.
Gotcha.
And I mean, I have a buddy who's a climbing the corporate ladder, and he has taken 3 or 4 major leaps. He left cushy jobs to go into another one that he believed was better. And then he left that cushy job to go to, and he wasn't afraid to leave the comfort to try it and get something better. And I think people are afraid of losing their comfort, and they want it to happen overnight. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know, blah, blah, blah.
I love this blah, 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 man. I think that's got some merit there. And yeah, I don't know how to explain to somebody that it's important to take those leaps, because it's difficult when you do have kids and people are resting on your shoulders to produce, and it's intimidating and scary, but so rewarding if you can step out a little bit and test the water. Absolutely.
I have another friend that I just thought about now that just literally took a $100,000 pay cut to go after her dream job.
Wow.
And she sat down with her family and said, "Hey, you know what? We're not going to be able to go on that trip we had planned last year.
Right.
Next year. We're not going on that now.
Right.
And are we all okay with that?" And her, her family said, "Yeah, we can do that." And most people are afraid to even have that conversation. They just say, they give you all the reasons why they can't do something rather than the reasons they can.
Right.
And hey, I'm not going to judge anybody else, but I'm a firm believer that if you really want something, with very little exception, you go out and do it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I think that's fantastic worldly advice. I'm glad you did. Glad you took your own advice way back.
And also it goes into everything. I mean, I say it about, if you want to go on a sheep hunt, if you want to go to Africa and hunt, if you want to go, if you just want to go to Pike County, Illinois with an outfitter once in your life, it's really, it's way more affordable than you probably think, but B, you can do it. It might take you 5 years to save for it, but you can do it.
Right.
And you can find out ways to make it happen. And most people just stop at, oh, well, I'll never get to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I hate that, because the world's your oyster, right?
It is. And it's so your oyster, and I'm glad you left home actually back when you did, because it sounds like you've had a very interesting life, and now I understand why you call your show Nick's Wild Ride.
Well, the show, that's a whole nother story, right?
Right. So let's get into that. Here's the evolution of that. So One thing I found about country music and hunting is that almost every country artist, male artist especially, wants to be a professional hunter, and every professional hunter seems to want to be a musician or be next to musicians. You know what I mean? You see it all the time. You see Lee and Tiff hanging with with Brantley Gilbert and Luke Bryan, and you see Nate Hosey making a new record. You know what I mean? And so you get both sides of it, and I think the reason for that is that country music, the demographic, we're all, the people that live country music also are the same people that get out in the woods and hunt. And so they're all one and the same, and we're all the same kind of person, right? And so you would think so, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of similarities there in that demographic. Anyways, my point. So through the country music thing, I started meeting all these hunting celebrities and these different personalities that like to hunt. And so one day I get a call from, somehow or another, he got my number. His name was Mike Andrews, and he was the guy that was the marketing director for ScentLock at the time, and he's since passed away, and was an incredible dude. And he called me up and said, "Hey, you don't know me, but my name's Mike, and I'm with a company called ScentLock, and we make." I said, he goes, "We make," and I go, "I know who ScentLock is, buddy. Trust me, I know." And he said, "You guys are coming to Detroit, and I'd love to surprise my boss with some tickets." He said, "I'll trade you a whole ScentLock get up for some tickets." And I said, "Oh, I'm in. Where do I sign up?" And so I got to meet these guys through the ScentLock guys through that. And after that, we stayed in touch. And he said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming out and hunting with Phil Phillips? We have a show called Wildlife Point Blank, and you could be on the show." And I said, "Sure, I'll come do that." So I went on a whitetail hunt in Texas with Phil Phillips. So we did that, and about a week later, their producer called me and said, "Hey, we really loved you on camera. We thought you were really cool. We've got this brand new show with this couple called Getting Close with Lee and Tiffany, And
Sure.
it's in its first season right now, and we're about to start filming the second season, and I was wondering if maybe you'd be interested in coming on their show and going hunting turkeys in Iowa with them. And I said, well, sure, of course, I'd love to do that. Why wouldn't I love to do that? So next thing you know, I'm at Lee and Tiffany's house in Iowa and hunting turkeys. And I just got to be fast friends with them. And they're Minnesotans, and we just hit it off. And
Sure.
And
right.
about that same time, their popularity just exploded. And so next thing you know, I'm on their show every just about once a year. I do some sort of hunt with them once a year on their show, and people would started saying, man, you ought to do your own show. You ought to do that. I said, I ain't got time for that. And just kind of enjoyed getting out to hunt with people, and that led to getting to know Don and Kenny Chesney, and I would do some stuff on Whitetail Freaks, and next thing you know, I'm filming every hunt that I do. So now I'm taking a camera with me everywhere I go, and I'm filming everything, and I'm enjoying that aspect of it, and I'm sending my hunts over to these guys, and I'm sending them into monster bucks, and next thing you know, I'm kind of doing that thing a little bit, and that all laid the groundwork for me getting to know a bunch of people in the industry.
Sure.
And so now fast forward about, I don't know, this is 10, 12 years after all this. I'm at ATA show visiting some friends, and I literally would just go to ATA show to hang out with friends and drink beer, and get to check out some.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we do sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And so I would just go and hang out and check out new gear and hang out with people. And Mark Baird, the producer of Getting Close and The Crush, and it doesn't produce The Crush anymore. He's got a company called Watermark Productions, and he produces several different shows, including Whitetail Freaks. He and I got to talking over a beer one day, and we were kind of bitching about outdoor programming in general.
Yep.
That it just, in my opinion, I'm a fan and a consumer. I love to watch outdoor TV. I love it. And I just felt like the quality was, overall was just going down, down, down. And it was the same stuff rehashed and, blah, 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 the same argument. We don't need to get into that right now if you don't want to. But
let's go. Absolutely.
He said to me, all right, Mr. Smarty Pants, what would you do if you had a TV show? And I said, well, I thought about it for a second. I said, you know what I'd do? I said, I'd do exactly what I do anyway. I would have like an Anthony Bourdain style show. When I go on a trip to hunt, I spend an extra day looking for a local beer and a local burger. Or right. If I end up I love making friends when I travel and doing different things. I said I would have it be as much about the experience and the travel side of things and the lifestyle side of what an area has to offer in the place you go to hunt as much as the hunt.
Right.
And you go to a destination to hunt and explore local food, culture, music, booze, whatever comes around. And he said, man, I really like that idea. And that we just left it at that. He called me up a couple weeks later. He said, man, I'm still thinking about that idea. and so we left it at that. Well, Dave Watson, who, is a bit of an industry legend and did Matthews TV for years, and he and I got to talking one day, and he loved that idea, and he said and then what you do, he said he suggested that maybe we get a different celebrity involved and they give me a ride to where I'm going and all these things, and we had all these different ideas for it, and Dave was the guy that really helped me develop it. He was the impetus for the whole thing, and he's the guy that came up with the name Nick's Wild Ride. And he said, you just follow you around, and wherever the wild ride takes you is where it's going to be. And so Mark Baird and Dave Watson kind of together helped me develop this. And the idea was maybe we would have a pilot and we'd see where it went. And if anybody actually liked the pilot, then we would continue from there. So we filmed the pilot. And it was a turkey hunt in Louisiana where I went and made hot sauce and ate local Cajun food and did a crawfish boil and went turkey hunting in the swamp. And next thing you know, the thing just took on a life of its own. Right. I started showing that around, and it really was what we tried to do. It was something that was actually different. And you hear that a lot. Oh, I got a hunting show that's different. But this actually had a different feel and a different flair to it. And it just, like I said, it took on a life of its own. And the network outdoor channel really just grabbed it, and they loved it, and they've rallied behind it, and of course fans have rallied behind it too. And next thing you know, we've got wives sending in emails saying, "Hey, this is the only show that I'll watch with my husband."
Right.
And you've got husbands saying, "Thank you so much, because now my wife will actually sit down and watch with me, and she bought me a Scent Crusher bag because she watches your show," and those kinds of things. And so and that's in a nutshell how it all started.
I think you're onto something. I mean, if ever there were a concept for a new generation of hunting shows, I think this is it. And the reason I say that is I love the hunt. I love the isolation of the hunt. I love being out there and hunting, like being actually out about hunting the species. And what I mean by that is learning the species, understanding their habitat, actually tracking them down in the northern parts of where we live, where we need snow, to follow that animal for hours and hours and finally maybe get a shot, but you learn so much.
Right.
And I love that aspect of hunting, and being in remote areas is also fantastic. But there's this other element to hunting that never seems to make it to the TV show until you came along, is that you have to travel to certain parts of the world, to different parts of the country. And within that part of hunting, there's a whole culture behind it. Whether you're traveling to the South and trying some barbecue, or whether you're traveling to any part of the country or around the world.
Oh, the world, absolutely.
The cultures that you encounter while you're traveling go so untold if you're traveling around the world. I never understood that. That's as interesting to me as the hunt itself.
And if you talk to somebody about that takes a trip somewhere and says, "Hey, how was your Montana mule deer hunt?" And they say, "Oh man, it was so cool." And, what was it like? And they say, "Man, the first thing they do, they don't start telling you right about the deer right away. They tell you about where they were,
right,
and what it looked like, and what the outfitter was like, or if they did an outfit, what the little town and I ran into this farmer, you wouldn't have believed him, and you go on, and you tell the story of your hunt." And so there's that aspect of the travel side. And I think people are interested in that because some people feel like we talked about, maybe they'll never get to go on that hunt and they can live vicariously through it. Right. But other people are interested, right? The other side of it is that every place you go, every place in the world has a story. There's a history there. Mm-hmm. And all you have to do is open your eyes and pay attention to it. If you drive into the square of an old town and you see that courthouse in the middle of the square and you go, "I wonder what the history of that building is."
Right.
And all you have to do is ask someone the question, and they'll go, "Oh yeah, so and so was shot on the front steps of that courthouse." And all it takes is just literally to scratch the surface, and that scratch turns into a crack, turns into a hole. I mean, if you just dig a little bit, you'd be everywhere you go in the world, you'd be surprised what you find. And I get so into that history and that culture and the people, and I've always been like that. But having this impetus to take a place, and it usually starts with a hunt. I'm still the hunter, and the one thing that I kind of laugh at is the naysayers about a show like this are the kind of some of the traditionalists, or whatever you might want to call them. You're always going to have haters. That's a whole nother conversation. But
sure, the world is full of them. Yes.
Yeah. So, but the one thing they say, well, that ain't a hunting show, because they're used to a hunting show being whisper, whisper, point, point, shoot, shoot for the whole thing, right? And that's fine. Trust me, I love to watch those shows. I love it. But they say it's not a hunting show, and I say to that, you've never watched it, because it still centers around the hunt. We plan episodes not necessarily around. We don't plan it around the area. We don't go, okay, we're going to go to this area because it's interesting on the lifestyle side. We go there to hunt. We plan the hunt first, and then we figure out what makes that place tick around the hunt. And that goes to going to hunt birds in England, and it goes to hunting whitetails in Iowa. Right. Whatever it may be, it's the hunt first, and then we find out what makes that place tick.
Right.
And it's so much fun.
It's so interesting much fun. Because, I mean, as you were hunting around anyway, if you've ever traveled to hunt and you're plopped, or you're removed from the place where you grew up or where you call home, and you're plopped into a spot that you've never been to before. The people are very interesting. The landscape is way different than anything you've ever seen before if you've only hunted in one spot.
That's right.
And the food and drink is guaranteed different than anything you've ever tried. And there would be little cultural differences in the food that and food types, things that don't make it to where you live because of who knows what. But you're gonna find a whole new delicacy. You're gonna find a whole new line of beers at some microbrew that is based off of the immigrants of the area.
That's right.
It's fascinating, and I think your concept, and I think you're right. I could sit down and watch this with my wife, who could care less about any hunting show, but she would be interested in this because you're telling so much more of the story, and that's what every hunter story really is. But for some reason, it never makes it to the tape. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that the goal is to have something for everybody. It's hardcore enough for the hunter, but it's also interesting enough for somebody, even if you don't hunt. And what's interesting is the way that non-hunters have gravitated towards this show. You know, somebody that's flipping through the channels and finds it and watches it. And then what's your job after that? Well, then your job is to present hunters in a good light and to make sure that we're representing. If we're going to find some audience, of course, the audience is probably 10% non-hunting and 90% hunting, right? But if those 10% that discover it, or somebody that comes from the music side, a music fan that comes in and finds the show, then the job is to make sure that we're presenting hunters in a good way. You know, that we're showing hunting in a positive and ethical light. Mm-hmm. And there's all those other aspects to think about as well. And I'm up to that challenge, and I enjoy it. And I like being able, and we've had multiple people weigh in, call in, emails, stuff like that say, hey, I found your show and I've been watching it for 2 seasons now. And this year I bought a bow and I'm going hunting. And I think that's, what could possibly be a better compliment than that? Right. Nothing, right. Because in the end, that's the only thing that's going to save us, man, is recruitment and retention.
You're right. You're right. And this is a very good way to introduce the non-hunter, not the anti-hunter, the non-hunter, into and gravitating into a concept of what hunting can be in a whole, not just a piece, not just a little puzzle of what we've been showing for years and years, not just the kill, not just the hunt in the field, but there's so much more to it. That's where you're going to drag that other 80% that are on the fence or just not thinking about it, that we need as allies as we continue to make sure that our tradition and lifestyle is fully preserved. Those are the folks we need on our side. So something like this, I think, brings them into the mold.
Oh, yeah, that. And also I think that when you arm the people that hunt already, I know for me personally, I didn't hunt anything but whitetails and ducks until I was in my mid-20s, late 20s. No, early 20s. Like I went on my first elk hunt in my early 20s, right? That was my first trip to hunt outside of turkeys, ducks, and deer. That single trip made me so much better of a hunter because it got me outside of my comfort zone. It forced me to try something different in a different style, in a different way, and made me think about how I approach an animal completely different. And I was able to take that knowledge and put it into my deer hunting back home. I hope that the other thing we do is inspire hunters that maybe have never had the chance or even thought about going and doing something different. Maybe we can inspire somebody to say, you know what, man, Nick just hunted, mule deer in in Mexico. I would love to go down there and do that.
Right.
Or maybe it's just literally like trying to hunt whitetails in a different state. Or whatever it is, if you just get yourself outside your comfort zone, you'll learn so much. And on top of that, you'll learn more about hunting in general. You'll learn more about other people who hunt, and therefore you'll be able to represent yourself better when it comes to talking to those people that don't hunt. And I think it's all one and the same. And I don't mean to wax all poetic about that, but I think that stuff is so important. I really do.
I completely agree. Well, you've been hunting for quite a while now. If you go back to your original Kentucky long rifle introduction to where you are today, you've hunted lots of different places.
Yeah, since I was 12. Yep.
Since you were 12, this has been a lifelong endeavor here. What types of styles and strategies and techniques have you adopted over the years that you're finding success with? whether it's gun or bow or scent control, things like that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've learned over the years that you now apply to all your hunts as you go through the woods and in the field.
What a great question. The trajectory of my life as a hunter has been kind of a wave in a way. So when I was younger, when I finally got out and hunted for the first time, I was obsessed. And up until the point where I ran away from home, I got out as often as I could. And I was deer hunting and pheasant hunting and duck hunting and hunter safety. Of course, I went through my hunter safety course when I was 12 and all that stuff. Yeah. And then when I left home, there's a lull in there where I was so busy on the road and playing music, I didn't have the chance to get out nearly as much as I liked. Sure. And then when I moved to Nashville, I was on the road a lot. So there's this lull where maybe I get out once a year and do something in between time I was like 17 and my early 20s. And when I finally settled down enough and I started getting back into deer hunting, like, hardcore again, is when I discovered bow hunting. It was the first time I'd ever hunted with a bow. I had actually shot a bow quite a bit, like in leagues and stuff back home when I was a kid. Yep. And I loved archery, but I'd never hunted archery because I didn't know anyone who really bow hunted that much. Sure. And so I got back into bow hunting, and that changed my life. That feeling of the intensity of that first bow hunt of it was a doe in Kentucky, and shooting that deer at 15 yards with a bow was the most intense thing I'd ever done. And I'd never felt my heart pound like that. And it was like heroin in my veins. I mean, it literally was the most addictive thing I've ever experienced, and I'm still addicted. You know what I mean? To that day, it hooked me so hard. And so from that point on, it was archery. And I was lucky enough to, get to do some really cool hunts with a bow. And, it was caribou in the Arctic, and it was elk hunting and black bear and a bunch of really cool stuff. And I just, every species that I tried, not only did it make me further trenched into the bow hunting thing, but it also got me addicted to the travel side of hunting. Right, sure. As much, trust me, I'll always, when it's all said and done, I'll be in a stand hunting a deer, but I loved exploring new places and trying new things with a bow. And so when Nick's Wild Ride came along, the first pilot was the turkey hunt, and then there was the very first thing we ever did was a archery elk hunt, and it was archery, and then Kimber came along as a title sponsor, and they make amazing rifles, and so it was Kimber, interestingly enough, that really got me back into hunting with a gun. And there's, obviously the factions in hunting that it's like, hardcore bow hunter and then the rifle hunters on the side, right? And then there's the Western rifle hunter, which is a whole nother deal, right? Sure. Right. So these factions really never mattered to me because I just did what I did, which was bow hunting. But when I started hunting with a gun, it opened up a whole nother kind of aspect to the thing, which was this surgical precision type of hunting, and I loved it. And I really enjoy hunting with a gun. I'm not saying that for the rest of my life the only thing I ever want to do is hunt with a gun, and I really don't enjoy whitetail hunting with a gun, but I really, all of a sudden, my eyes got opened up to this backcountry, sheep and goats and all this other stuff that I never probably would have gone and done if I hadn't started hunting with a gun. And so what ended up happening is my reintroduction to hunting with a gun has opened up all these other possibilities for me, including going to Africa and all this other stuff. Not that you can't do that stuff with a bow, and I have done some of it with a bow. Right. But I've enjoyed working hard I work as hard on my marksmanship with a rifle as I do at shooting a bow. And I think it just makes me a more balanced hunter. It makes me better I'm better at rifle hunting because I'm a bow hunter, and I'm better at bow hunting because of some of my rifle experience.
It makes sense to me. I think there's as much variability in a long shot as there is in a 50-yard shot with an arrow. So you have to know your stuff. You have to know windage and distance. There's a lot to that is every bit as complex as a good bow shot.
Yeah, and I love it. And I think the reason I love it is because I've been bow hunting so long. It's something new. Right. It's something fun. It's another aspect. It's another feather in your cap, or however you want to look at it. It's another tool that I've got that can take me to another place.
Right.
And I went to England, for example, and I went over there to hunt birds. And while I was there, right before I went, they asked if I wanted to maybe go hunt a fallow deer. And I said, absolutely. And they said, well, the bow hunting's illegal there.
I know. That was a fascinating aspect. See, there you go. There's that cultural thing that you didn't realize until you.
If it weren't for the gun, I never would have been able to hunt big game there. Right. And so I think it's just like I said. That's another technique that I've got in my bag now, and I've really enjoyed the rifle side of things.
Right.
I have.
Right, and to hear that bow hunting in England is illegal. The American in us says those silly Brits, what are they thinking? But their perspective is that maybe they're just not good bow shots. I don't know, but their perspective is that they want a good clean kill every time. They don't want to have any miscue whatsoever. And
we all know if you've hunted with a bow, you've wounded something at some point in your life. That's it does happen, but it can happen with a rifle too. I guess if you really are objective about it, I can see that viewpoint. Mm-hmm. But on the same token, I work really hard, just like every hunter should, to be as proficient as you can and make the best ethical shots you can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've made my share of mistakes. That's for sure.
You're going to, and with a gun too, not just the bow. You can certainly see their perspective, but I also don't. I guess there are arguments for both sides.
Oh, absolutely, no doubt.
So, as you've traveled around hunting big game, have you noticed any kind of pattern as far as scent control that you have to adapt to, or is there anything outside the ordinary that we haven't heard yet as far as wind, playing the wind or hunting?
Man,
the wind?
I'll tell you the one thing that is as I kind of evolved into from my whitetail background into more of a worldwide big game hunter, if you will. The one thing that has driven me the most nuts is when you're whitetail hunting, we obsess about scent control, right? Like right now, I start whitetail hunting next week. Mm-hmm. I've been wearing scent-free deodorant and been scrubbing myself in using only scent-free soap for 2 weeks already.
Right.
You know what I mean? I've just obsessed about my clothes and everything, every facet. I wipe my bow down, for goodness sakes. You know what I mean? I do everything. And then you go out, and even when you go out west and you go elk hunting, it's like literally the guide shows up and smells like high karate. You know what I mean? And that's the guide who's supposedly the guy. And in the end, it boils down to wind. Right. And the difference between elk hunting and whitetail hunting is that when you sit in a stand, oftentimes it's 360. You never know where something's going to come from. You try and hunt the best stand for the wind, but you really, at any given point in time, can have something underneath you, behind you at any point, and that's why we do all the crazy stuff that we do.
Right.
What's interesting to me is when you go around the rest of the world, they laugh at that kind of stuff. And it boils down to you put the wind in your face, and if it isn't in your face, you're not going to kill anything. End of story.
Right.
And that to me has been tough because it's so ingrained in me. I'm like, no, you stink, man. We can't do this, and it's not like that, and it goes to show too. I've taken that back to my whitetail hunting. I used to, if there was a marginal wind, I used to be like, it'll be fine. I don't hunt a stand anymore unless the wind's right for it, because it doesn't matter how much scent control you really do. All you're doing is trying to get those few extra seconds out of that moment, but you're never going to fool a whitetail's nose.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Right.
You're in my experience too. Maybe what you're doing is by using an ozonics or using the scent crusher bag or spraying yourself down, you're just giving yourself that edge for that extra 10, 20 seconds of them sniffing the air, trying to figure out what you are, Right. But in my opinion, you can't fool a whitetail,
Right.
That's my opinion. I'm sure that you'll hear all the haters for that, but I think
I hear it all.
Does
sides.
It mean? Am I saying that stuff doesn't help or matter? No, it does, and I use all of it.
Right.
You can bet your butt that I'm going to use every single tool I can this weekend. And I crush all ozone all over my clothes. I spray everything down with a spray. I do it all. Maybe it's because it makes me feel mentally better. If nothing else, it makes me feel more ninja in the stand, Right. And I'll take every edge I can get, every single one.
I think a lot of us do. It's the cloak of scent and visibility.
And maybe it's all mental. You know what I mean? But whatever.
Whatever.
As long as I'll take it.
I'm
exactly.
With you. Totally with you. Let's go on a memorable deer hunt, Nick. If you can think back to a time that might be your most memorable of all time, and walk us through how that whole hunt unfolded from dawn to dusk, or maybe the hunt started before that.
That's such a tough one, because every hunt. I mean, literally, my mind is going through the picture book of deer hunts. I think my favorite story is the one that got away story. So I was in Iowa hunting with Lee and Tiffany, and which is, first of all, like Disneyland for deer hunters, right? I think they have some of the best whitetail ground in the world, and it's because they have the means and time to manage a large pieces of ground solely for the purpose of hunting whitetails. It's literally like Disneyland for whitetails. And I was just so lucky to draw this Iowa tag and get to hunt with them this year. And I was so excited because I'd never gotten to be anywhere where, you grow. If you're a whitetail hunter, you look at social media and you watch these videos and dream about those giant Iowa deer. You know what I mean? That's the holy grail, those big bodied, giants that the Midwest is famous for, right?
Right.
And so now I've got this opportunity, and I'm there in Iowa, and I'm looking at all these mounts on the wall, and I can't sleep at night because I'm so excited, and it's the middle of the rut, and there's guys coming in from the field, not just at their place, but just all over Iowa that, you know how it is, deer season, you're texting, what are you seeing? How's it going? And everybody's just like, man, the rut is kicking, and you're going to get in the woods and you're going to freak out and it's going to be nuts. So the first morning I get up and I get my bow and I put everything on and I spray myself down, and we drive out, and I change my clothes outside the truck and do everything right. And I get up in the stand, and we're with the cameraman, and we're just getting everything. We get down, we get it. Everything's perfect. We sneak in there, and we walk on the leaves, and we're just taking our time and walking really slow and just doing everything right. And we get up in there, and we don't see a thing, not a doe, nothing. An hour goes by, and 2 hours go by, and I'm like, what are we doing wrong? We're over a food plot that is just gorgeous, just frost-covered clover. I mean, it's just beautiful, and it looks like literally something you'd see on TV. You know what I mean? And
right.
And we know, because on camera stuff, we got all the intel. There's shooters in here, and they should be here, and so and so saw a deer in here a couple weeks ago, and this kind of thing. Nothing. There's not even a doe out there, and it's cold. You can see your breath, and like I said, frost on the ground. And so I take my time and I start ranging different spots, because it's a field, so it's difficult too. If they come out on the edge of this field, there's no real stick that you can range and know your yardage or anything. So I range a clump of dirt, and it's 25 yards. And so I'm like, there's my mark, I know somewhere around that clump of dirt. And so I'm not a huge fan of rattling. It works.
Okay.
And it's not that it doesn't work. For me, I tend to subscribe to if you're in the right spot, they will come. You know what I mean? They'll eventually be there. I like to just sit down. I mean, the best, I don't know, you can wear the best camouflage and do the best scent control and everything. I mean, the best control of your visibility and your scent is just to sit down and shut up and stay still. That's my opinion. You know what I mean? So
right.
We just sit down and we're quiet. And finally, I'm like, I got to do something. So I pull out my rattling horns and I bang them together for a couple seconds. And within seconds is a 5-year-old deer that's about 165, just giant. deer.
Interesting.
And he comes walking out, and he's looking around, and he's in the corner. He comes to the corner of the field on the opposite side, and there's steam coming out of his nostrils, and it's just like he's just, and you can see the fog. I mean, it was something out of a movie. I'll never forget that scene. And so we wait and we watch, and it's definitely a shooter. And from the other side of the field, right, kind of behind us and to my right, comes in another deer, and I can hear him walking through the woods. And I'll be damned if it isn't another 5-year-old deer. And here's two mature deer, and they're at opposite ends of the field, and they see each other.
Wow. And
they come to the middle of the field, and they have a absolute knockdown, drag out brawl right in front of me.
No kidding.
And it is, I'm just, first of all, I actually had a moment where I go, even if I don't shoot one of these deers, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. You know what I mean? This is like what you see on TV. This is like a movie, you know? And it's going on and on and on. And I'm talking to the camera guy. I go, hey, that other deer, they're both shooters, right? And he's like, yeah, we know one of them. And the one deer was a big mainframe 10 that had chocolate tips. That from, I don't know where he lost his velvet or whatever, almost all the tips of his antlers were like brown. And they nicknamed him Fondue because of that. And so anyway, I'm watching this whole thing go down, and I'm bow ready and I'm ready to go. And all of a sudden they break off and they get done fighting. And the one of the deer comes, the one with the chocolate tips comes to the clump of dirt. And I'm like 25 yards, got him. So I sit back and I take my time and I draw and I anchor. And I let the arrow go, and it goes right underneath him. I can see a poof of white hair, gives him a haircut on his belly.
Oh, wow.
And it hits the dirt, and he goes running away. And I'm devastated. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I don't know if I just didn't, if I pulled it or what was going on, but I was like, everything felt right. It doesn't make any sense, So I'm just mortified. I'm almost in tears. It would have been the biggest deer of my life. I mean, he was pushing 170 kind of thing, and it was just a gorgeous deer. So finally I start kind of replaying it, and I can see my luminoc and my arrow out there. So I range right where the arrow's at, and the arrow's at like 60 yards. And so I go looking back, and it shouldn't be at 60 yards, and I look back, and there's a clump of dirt, and then there's another clump of dirt, and there's another clump of dirt. And what I had done was he just came to a clump of dirt. And in the moment, it was so fast, I just assumed that it was the clump of dirt that I had ranged at 25 yards. He was 45 yards away.
Wow.
So I shot him for 25. He was 45 yards away, and I just shot right underneath him. And it was just, in the moment, all I saw was clump of dirt and deer. And I thought, well, he's in my spot. You know what I mean? And I just completely had a brain fart and screwed it up. And what would have been the biggest year of my life walked away to live another day. So, but to this day, I think about that deer every single morning. Right. Every morning when I wake up, I lay in bed, and for whatever reason, that deer pops into my head. It's the one that got away, and it's still the coolest hunt of my life. So I guess I have to look at it like that.
And deemed the most memorable, obviously, because you probably think about that one more than any of the others. Probably so, and I think that, and I don't know, maybe that shows the mark of somebody that really is passionate about hunting, when it isn't just about the killing. It's about the whole thing. Yeah. And I said it to myself in the middle of that fight when they were fighting. I said, even if I don't shoot one of these things, how cool is that? Right. And it's about those moments that you're not supposed to see. These things that are supposed to be private to the deer, private to nature. These things that humans we're not here to see. I love being privy to those moments, those private moments of nature that most people never get to see. And being in that moment in time, I'll never forget it. And I think it's so cool, and that's what keeps me coming back. Right. Right. Yeah, I think some of my most memorable deer hunts are the ones that I didn't get, and they're equivalent to the ones that I did was some of the best hunts that I've had. It is funny how they kind of rank up there. And I recognize that, when I start off a story by saying I was hunting with Lee and Tiffany, automatically people are like, oh, well, no, I'm never going to get that opportunity, but right. I also recognize that how cool that was to begin with. Right. I mean, just to hunt prime whitetail ground and to see, it's like an aquarium for whitetails. You know what I mean? It's the coolest. It was the neatest experience, right.
I'm just really lucky to have gotten to do that. Don't get me wrong. I've had my share of public land triumphs and mishaps as well.
Right.
Lots of them.
It's part of hunting. That's why they call it hunting. Let's go down through a 10 rapid fire question exercise here, if that's cool with you, Nick.
Absolutely.
All right. What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Sit down, shut up, and stay still.
Love it. It's a great one. It works well. It really does.
I'll tell you the truth. It took me a long time to not only to believe in that, but to figure it out, because I am admittedly a ridiculously fidgety ADD kind of dude. So I think that's why I love the tree stand, because it forces me to meditate a little bit, calm myself down.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know. I read it somewhere once. It's something about the best camouflage is sitting still.
Right.
It's true.
I think that's an old Fred Bear saying.
Is it? Is that what it is?
Pretty sure. I'd have to do that. I'm pretty sure. Yep. And we go by what Fred Bear says. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I was going to say that's the Bible right there.
There it is. Yep. All right, we all have these items that we like to hunt with for whatever reason. Maybe it's a good luck charm, or it's actually makes us better at our hunt, and it drives us crazy if we leave it in the truck or at home while we're in the field. What's that one thing for you?
Oh, I've got a little tiny. This is a fairly new one. It's about seven years old now. I've got a little tiny plastic cowboy that my daughter gave to me when she was about 2, and she knew I was going hunting, and she gave this to me, and she was old enough that she could talk a little bit, and she said, "For good luck," or "Good luck, Daddy," and she hands me that little plastic cowboy, and it's been in my pack everywhere I've been all around the world ever since. And actually, you're probably the first person I've told that to. No, I don't think anybody else knows that. But I would never leave that thing at home. That is my good luck charm.
That's fantastic. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. All right. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
In life?
Mm-hmm.
I hate it when, I travel all the time, right?
Right.
I go to the baggage claim in an airport.
Yep.
And if you go to a baggage claim in Europe, everybody stands back.
Yeah.
And when your bag comes, you just step forward.
Yep.
And get your bag, and then there's like a gap in there so that you have room to do that. At every other airport in America, everybody crowds the baggage claim,
right?
And you can't move. You can't get to your bag. And then when you do try to get to your bag, somebody gives you a dirty look or is pissed off at you. That is my pet peeve. I hate that. I don't know why that bothers me so much, but every single time I go to the airport, it makes steam come out of my ears.
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot more pet peeves, but
there are a million pet peeves, but that's one good snapshot of the classic pet peeve. That's why they call pet peeves.
I hate it so much. It drives me nuts.
Yeah.
To the point where coming down the escalator to baggage claim makes my blood pressure go up.
That's funny. All right, so you're 40-ish these days, Nick?
Yeah, I'm 38.
38. All right.
I'll be 38. I'll be 38 on my first day of elk hunting this year.
All right.
I've killed an elk on the last 3 times that I've hunted elk on my birthday. I've killed an elk on my birthday. So let's hope that happens again this year.
It's a heck of a good birthday present.
Yeah, right.
What would you tell the 17-year-old Nick Hoffman, knowing what you know today?
Oh, shut up. Like literally, shut up. That's what I would say to myself, because I'm a really passionate person, and that comes across in how I talk and what I do and how energetic I am about the things that I do. And looking back at myself as a young guy, I made a lot of mistakes by just not sitting back and shutting up and listening and learning. And instead I wanted to be, where it comes from? It comes from the fact that I started playing in bands and stuff and doing lots of stuff with adults from a very young age. And I always wanted to be an adult, and I always wanted to be older, and I wanted to be the cool guy. And so when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I tried too hard to be the cool guy. And I could have learned so much and avoided so much embarrassment if I would have just sat back, shut up, and listened. And now when I go to if a 20-year-old Nick or 17-year-old Nick would have went to a deer camp and tried to tell all the stories, you know what I mean? Be the guy that had the stories. Now, 40-year-old Nick sits in a deer camp and sits back and listens to the stories. And I've learned a lot more in the last 10 years than I probably did in those first 10 years. You know what I mean? Because of it. So 17-year-old Nick, if you're listening, shut up.
Shut up. All right. Similar to your number one hunting tip of all time, sit down and shut up. And
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
move.
There's a lot. There's a theme going on here, right?
There is, yep. All right. You meet a stranger at a hotel lobby somewhere in the world at a hunting convention or something of that nature, and they come up and they ask you what you do for a living. What do you tell them?
Ooh, that's a tough one in my case. I think I will always identify myself as being professionally. I'm a musician. That's what I do. Because my entire adult life, that's what I've done for a living. The idea that I'm somehow a professional hunter or something like that, it applies now, and I guess there's some truth to that, but I don't identify with that, and I think that might be why our show comes across as authentic as it does, and why people like it is because I'm not trying to be an expert. I don't consider myself to be an expert. In fact, I consider myself to be an average hunter, and so I get a lot more opportunity to hunt, and I consider myself to be very consummate at it, but I will never claim to be an expert, and I'm never going to sit and be that guy who does expert tips on his show. Man, I'm just a guy out there enjoying life, going on these cool trips and trying to share it and with people. And so I'll always identify with being I'll identify as a musician.
Okay.
But the idea that I'm somehow an expert or a pro hunter, I don't think I'll ever get there in my head.
Okay. All right. Very good. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had scrambled eggs and toast every morning, no matter what. I'm a big breakfast guy. And so it starts off, this is backwards. I drink about 3 cups of coffee with nothing in my stomach. And then I get all jittery and feel like crap. And then I make myself scrambled eggs and toast. And you'd think that I'd learn. Maybe I should eat first and then the coffee. Nope. Coffee's like smoking a cigarette for me. I gotta have it every morning, first thing. I go into Alaska, and we're in the backcountry, and I bring a pound of coffee and a little tiny French press with me, and I make boiled water and a good cup of coffee every single morning, no matter what.
I've been known to pack my own coffee and my own coffee maker, even if it's electric. I
do the same thing, buddy.
Yeah.
The greatest invention for the coffee addicted hunter is that those Starbucks Via packets, those little tiny instant coffee from Starbucks are actually pretty good. They're passable. It'll do.
Good to know. I have fallen in love with my single canister espresso maker or double canister. It's such a simple machine, and it works so well, even as long as you have heat. That's all.
Hey,
good.
Man, I'm just as hardcore as anybody, and I will hike up. I train with 50 pounds in my pack, and I can hike up a mountain with anybody. But I bring my coffee with me, and I will not head up the mountain without 2 cups of coffee in me. That's a fact.
That's my day exactly.
Call it what you will.
The coffee goes on first. That's my house.
Yeah, and on the flip side, on the more disgusting side, it's bit me literally in the butt a couple of times in the whitetail stand too. Too much coffee sometimes makes you feel not so good, if you know what I mean.
Correct.
So I've had to climb down a time or two. Yeah. So I'll admit it. Yeah.
I'm with you. All right, you get a blank canvas, a blank billboard on the side of a highway. You put anything you want on it. What would it say?
You mean is it advertising me, or is it just like, just like literally like a message of some sort?
Can be a message.
Hashtag, that's easy. That's easy. Lately, I've been hashtagging posts with hashtag travel, hashtag adventure, and hashtag be happy.
Beautiful.
And there's a reason for that, is because somebody asked me recently that same question. They said, "What if you were going to hashtag your life? What would it be?" And that's what I said. I said travel, adventure, and be happy. And I believe that those things go hand in hand. I believe that the more you explore and the more you travel and the more you and it doesn't have to be internationally. It doesn't have to be even in the next state. Just go check out a little town that's an hour from you that you've never been to. Hop in the truck and go somewhere. And like I said, if you scratch the surface, you'll be amazed at what you find. And that's become nearly a religion for me. I mean, if I get a chance and I've got a couple days off, I'll just hop in the truck and drive around a little bit. If I find a little local barbecue stand or something I've discovered some pretty amazing gems around my house that I never knew that were there just by wandering.
It is amazing what you find when you look. It's crazy. All right. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops in your head and why?
Man, that's such a good question. The first person successful, the first person that pops into my head is my dad. And like I said before, I think my dad embodies the American dream. I mean, there's a guy that was intelligent enough to do anything he wanted, but he chose to take the path of working hard and working for himself and sacrificing for his family and still enjoying life. My dad always still found time to go bass fishing on the weekends and fly remote control planes. And now later on, he's become a pilot and learned to fly. You know, he enjoys life, but he works hard. And I think that's the definition of success, you know, is defining your life, what you want for it and going out and getting it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I spend my whole life trying to emulate my dad, you know?
Right. That's a great answer, Nick. Okay. What's a typical day in your life look like? Sunrise to sunset.
Not nearly as glamorous as anyone would think. How about that? So my life, it wakes up, it starts with me pissed off at my alarm clock. I am not a morning person.
Okay.
I reluctantly get up to hunt. Not because I'm not excited to hunt. I just hate waking up. It's the musician in me. I think that I'm used to late nights and late mornings. You know what I mean? And so my clock is eternally on music time. So it starts with just a groggy grizzly bear after hibernation kind of hour, which involves the coffee and then the breakfast and then for me it's always work, and the work starts with the computer and the phone, unfortunately, and then from there, my day could be anything from practicing music to editing a TV show nowadays. It's not glamorous. You know what I mean? It's literally just the grind of daily life, just like anybody else. I've got horses. I go out and shovel every day. Yep. And I work my dog. I have a pretty badass duck dog, if I do say so myself. So I go out and I work him every day and keep him up to speed, and then I try to be the best husband and the best dad I can be, and then I drink a cocktail and try to watch the news and go to bed, and that's it.
Very cool.
I don't know. I want to give you something funny and something more glamorous than that, but that's it, man. That's it. I work and I play a little bit, and I enjoy a good stiff gin drink, and then I go to bed. That's
gin
it.
Drink. Oh wow, no kidding.
I like whiskey too, but lately it's been gin. I like gin.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't enjoyed a gin cocktail in quite some time.
Gin and tonic, man. That's like the what makes the world go around.
It was one summer that gin and tonic was my go-to drink. I don't know why. It just popped into my schedule.
I encourage you to revisit that.
All right.
Think of me.
All right. I'll revisit that at some time soon. All right. And then last question. What's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like? I'm assuming that it's different than a regular day.
Oh, I mean, deer hunting for me is religion, and it's based in complete and utter what's the word I'm looking for? I could start over for you.
That's okay.
What's the word I'm looking for? Superstition. So my deer hunting is completely different than my normal life. It is based completely on superstition and routine, and it's almost like a religious experience for me. You know, I get up in the morning, I have my cup of coffee, and I go and I take a shower with scent-free soap, and I don't just put shower. I mean, I scrub with a washcloth. I mean, I have this vision of me scrubbing away all the nastiness, and then I put on my long johns, and I go to the truck in my base layer and nothing else. Everything's in a bag, and then I go out, either in the four-wheeler or the truck, and I don't put on my clothes until I get to where I'm parked, and I pull out my bow and I spray everything down. I spray my boots down. I get there and I creep to the stand. I'm obsessive about making no noise, even when it's windy, and it's not because chances are nobody can hear me walking anyway. You ever had that time where somebody drove up to you in a four-wheeler on the stand and you didn't even hear it until they were like 50 yards away? Sometimes I think I'm overzealous about it, but I creep to the stand and I creep up. And if the ladder on the stand pops once, it's like if I feel like I've insulted the world, you know what I mean?
Right.
and I check my stands ahead of time to make sure they don't pop. And, I'm just obsessive about it. And then you get up there and I sit down, I close my eyes, I take deep breaths. I picture myself being a damn ninja. You know what I mean? And then I wait. And 90% of the time, nothing comes. And 10% of the time, something does.
You mean you're like the rest of us?
Yeah, exactly. I close my eyes and think, but trail camera says it doesn't lie, and they're here. I have to keep reminding myself that they're here. Right. And that's it.
Very cool, man. All right,
I live for it, man. I do. My buddies and I. This time of year, especially, we're texting pictures back and forth and talking about pressure changes. And I'm all excited because looks like there's a front coming through the day before I hunt. And it's just, we obsess about every aspect of it. And just like everybody else, we've got a camp full of traditions and a bunch of lies. Lots and lots of lies. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Excellent. Very cool. That's the 10 rapid fire questions, Nick. If we want to know more, if we haven't covered enough content in this and we have more questions, if there's a chance that we didn't get far enough in our conversation, where can we find you on social media and your websites, and when can we watch your show on television and what channel? And also, if you have some musically, if you have concerts coming up, new albums debuting, where can we find all that stuff?
Well, everything's at nickswildride.net, and all my socials are Nick's Wild Ride. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff is Nick's Wild Ride, all one word, obviously. And all the music and everything is at nickhoffman.com. So it all is one and the same and connected, and it's all under Nick's Wild Ride. So, and we're on Outdoor Channel Friday nights at 7:30 Eastern.
Very cool, man. Very, very cool. This has been an absolute pleasure, Nick. I've enjoyed talking to you. It's your ride is wild, I would say, in so many different ways. Your life has been a roller coaster in a sense, where you were brave enough to leave home and made a go of it, and we're in the right place at the right time. And that's inspiring. So thank you for sharing all that intimate detail with us today.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you, and it's fun for me to get to just have a conversation and relive some of that. And I think if you've never seen the show or heard my music or anything like that, I think the one thing you can take away from this thing is literally I'm a guy that's absolutely living his dream. You're looking at a guy who has gotten the chance to live his life beyond his wildest dreams. And how cool is it that I get to say that? And I pinch myself every day as I'm grizzly bearing it out of bed every morning. The one thing that gets me going is realizing how lucky I am and just how much fun it is, and that I get to share it with people. It's just the funnest thing ever. So I appreciate you giving me the chance to share it with everybody.
I enjoyed talking to Nick. He's very down to earth, and you'd think that somebody that has reached the level of fame that he has, with the likes of Kenny Chesney and Keith Urban and Trace Adkins, that he might get a big head, but Nick's not that way. He's very, very humble, down to earth. He comes from humble roots, and I had no idea that Minnesota was a fiddle playing hotspot. Didn't dawn on me. Best of luck to Nick in his television show and his endeavors, and hopefully he'll continue playing the fiddle. He's a very talented guy and with a pretty interesting story. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Yeah, we do, Jay, and it's we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening, pretty much launching off this week. And
the Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
Here in the Midwest, the crops are coming down, and with the crops coming off the fields, and the deer are going to start utilizing morning and evening breakfast and dinner on the edges of these crop fields. If you're somewhere that you don't have crops, it might be something you don't understand. But right now, my focal point is, season opens today here in Ohio, the 24th. And, it's just that time of year where you can set along a freshly cut cornfield or soybean field, and these whitetail they're naturally going to be out there grazing for missed corn or corn that's fallen off the corn head or beans that's come out of the bean head or the back of the combine, or maybe they spilled a pile of corn, turned in there too much in their hopper. But, you focus on these field edges, and it's something that, if you play the wind and you play the fresh harvest, the deer curiosity really gets the best of them when it comes to freshly cut fields. And it's something that's been proven deadly for a great long time now that these deer are going naturally. It's almost like they don't realize the corn's down and people can see them for the first week or so. So that I'm going to focus on hunting the edge of freshly cut crops for the first 2 weeks. And it seems to be a great focal point for me to be able to kill a mature buck.
Excellent, my friend. Very, very good tip of the week there, Dusty. I appreciate that. I'd like to say thank you to Morse's Sporting Goods for sponsoring the Chubby Tines Tip of the Week. I also like to say thank you to all of our sponsors. We deeply appreciate their support, and please go check out our sponsors. If you're thinking about buying any of these products in these categories or shopping at any stores, please go check these guys out. So I'd like to say thank you to Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, Covert Scouting Cameras, the Horny Buck Seed Company, Morse's Sporting Goods, and back on board is the ScentLock Enforcer. So take control of your odor footprint with the ScentLock Enforcer, your personal ozone generator. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you? Or you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.